So here I was coming back from Istanbul, Turkey, with a 3-month-old baby. I was leaving my husband, not going back. He didn't know it yet. So I had a round-trip ticket, 1 suitcase, a baby, and no freaking idea what I was going to do. And I was reading Time and Newsweek every week there, and all I was seeing was stuff about computers, and I'm thinking, I'll never survive. So I get home on his birthday in 1985, and I'd been away for 3 years, I guess. So here I am now sitting in the dining room crying about how am I going to survive? I'll have to go get a job, and I don't know what I can do. And, I quit college, so I'm an idiot and all of those things. And my dad said, come with me. And he took me back into his office, and he had a Mac, the very original 1984 Mac. This is March of 1985.
Come on.
So he says, see this? You're going to learn how to use this, and you'll be fine. So pretty soon, I'm doing little gigs for DoD contractors, doing illustrations for training manuals, like weapon slings and missiles, and United Telecom, and some of those folks, doing schemas for business phone systems and stuff. And then I started realizing that you could use this computer to connect to other Macs through something called Apple Talk at the time.
Welcome to the Legacy Angel Network Venture Lounge, where nothing ventured is nothing changed. For Matt Helmenthaler, press 1. For member services, press 2. For real raw startup stories, press 3. For all other questions or concerns, please wait on the line in our
Good evening, everyone. I'm Matt Helmenthaler, and you're listening to Venture Lounge, after-hour conversations with founders and investors. These are the stories, insights, and conversations that you aren't going to find on the company website. Because the real lessons you learn in the startup world, the risks you take as an entrepreneur, the highs and the lows, the moments in your journey when no one else believes in you right before you break through, those are the moments that you just have to hear for yourself. So grab a drink and listen in to the men and women who are changing the world. Welcome to the Venture Lounge.
We'll get started, y'all. Welcome back to Venture Lounge. Nothing ventured, nothing changed. I'm Connor Sherman, creative director here at Legacy, and I'm sitting across from our founder and co-host Matt Helmenthaler. What's up, Matt?
What's up?
Who's joining us today, man?
My lovely friend, Miss Lilian Myers. We actually met. Was it about a year ago now?
Maybe a little bit more than that.
A little bit more than a year ago.
I think so.
At Groundswell.
Yep.
Kudos to Groundswell. Yeah. Connecting people. We met at Groundswell. You came over here with Ron afterwards, and we all sat down for an hour or two and had a drink.
Yeah.
And that's where the journey began. So Lilian has been just like a insane encouragement to me. I'll call her up at random times and we meet for coffee, and it's always like incredibly beneficial. This lady is a wealth of knowledge. I want to read just some of the things that you've done.
Oh,
my. And now it's I'm not going super deep. It's just all like stuff you've already published on your LinkedIn profile. But I want to just, all right, so presently, innovation coach for GuideWell, strategic advisor for, is it Dell or not Dell?
It's Della.
Della Health Tech.
Norwegian company.
That's right, the Norwegian company. You have your strategic advisor for G Space Inc., advisory board member to the UK National Innovation Centre for Aging, advisory board member for the Centre of Entrepreneurship,
at Embry-Riddle University.
At Embry-Riddle.
Yep.
And we have, let me see here, member of the Orlando Tech Council. I'm a member of the Orlando Tech Council now,
well,
too.
Well, everybody should be.
I know. They're freaking amazing. You were the CEO and executive director of StarterStudio for 6 years.
No, I was not the CEO for 6 years, just 2.5. I was on the board there for many years.
Okay.
And a donor to their Evergreen Fund, a donor to the organization generally. But a strong believer in building ecosystems and helping give a hand up to new entrepreneurs.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Co-founder of Economy 4. You were at IBM for 3 years. I mean,
Well, started my life at Microsoft, my tech career at Microsoft, forever ago.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I could do in a lifetime all the things that you've done.
Got a bunch of founder things in
yeah,
there too.
founder, CEO of Alliant Corporation. I mean, this is just wow. Associate director of the University of Central Florida Venture Lab, VP of marketing. I mean,
that company was bought by Google.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Anyway, this is a very long list. It just keeps going.
It's because I'm not young.
No, it's that's awesome.
Hey,
that's awesome.
there's a thing.
That's awesome. So I want to thank you for being on our little show today, and it means a lot to me. It means a lot to the people that are watching because we're really reaching out into the market and trying to kind of capture people who want to just kind of go for it in their life and venture out and do cool things. And we want to introduce them to people that have done that have had an idea and have just kind of stepped out and went for it in their life. And I can think of no better person to be with us here today that represents that.
That's very kind. Thank you so much. That's really
Yes.
helpful.
Those are the moments. So to Lilian,
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you.
All right.
Lilian, you got to start by just unpacking your entrepreneurial journey for us. Like, what do you think was the origin point? Where did you grow up? All that.
Well, where did I grow up? That's such a tricky question all by itself, right?
Ooh.
So
Stay down that path. Yeah.
it is a tricky question because my father was an upwardly mobile bank executive, so we kind of moved around a lot. A lot of people, when I say it, start to ask if we were in the military, but my mother was an opera singer, and she ended up in New York singing, and my father and stepmother, kind of had us and moved us around the Southeast, which was great. So places like Columbia, South Carolina, Greensboro, North Carolina, Birmingham, Alabama.
I was born in Columbia.
You were born in Columbia?
I
Get out of
was.
town. My
Yeah.
brother just moved back there, of all crazy things.
Nice.
I moved back from San Francisco to Columbia, where he hasn't been in.
San Fran to Columbia.
Yeah, crazy, right? But
All right.
there you go.
Yeah.
So yeah, go Gamecocks, right?
Yeah.
And that's, it's an interesting thing, growing up being kind of in different places, learning, how to find your identity in new places and that sort of stuff. And I think that it makes you a little bit resilient, and probably like, Army brats and that kind of thing. You have to sort of learn how to find your footing amongst new people and how to create your identity and do that sort of thing. I was always a crappy student. I was a terrible, terrible student.
Oh, man.
Oh, dear Lord. Yeah, really the worst.
Yeah.
Yeah, so...
Did it just not hold your interest, like the subject at hand, or what do you think that was?
Well, the things I loved were, literature and art and history and, math. While my father was a banker and he has done some extraordinary things. In fact, he still does extraordinary things, and I marvel all day, every day about, seeing my first computer in the basement. He was the person responsible for kind of putting South Carolina National Bank. So just to give you a clue. So Columbia, South Carolina, in probably 1968, I saw my first computer when he walked me down into the basement of this building, and this IBM, whatever it was, that went on for miles in this basement with raised floors and, all the stuff and tape and the whole thing. And I was like, oh, God, this was crazy. But he was such an innovator around all things that were in that domain.
Oh, wow.
That's how he, kind of moved through his life, ultimately becoming the head of research and development for what is in Orlando and always was. He'd been the chairman of the board of the Institute of Internal Auditors, which is an international organization, and ultimately kind of left banking and went to run research and development for that professional association. So, we got to go all over the place where he was giving speeches and doing stuff, and I just thought he was the smartest, coolest guy in the world, and he and my stepmother were just incredible parents to us, and making us curious about all things, and it was pretty amazing. But so you take that and juxtapose, a completely right brain creative, my mother, who was, kind of incredible in her own right, and then you end up being this weird kid who can't be right or left. You're kind of like, oh, well, that's really interesting. That's fascinating. And so you're running all over the place, and you're thinking, that stuff, that's work. I don't want to do that. I want to do the fun, exciting things. And so shiny objects, yeah, that's where it all started. So that curiosity, I guess, is what really kind of gets you started down a path that everything in your life has to be some sort of crazy exploration. And that's kind of
I can identify with that. My pops, Mark, I moved 23 times by the time I was 16 years old.
Oh, wow. You got me beat by a long shot.
Well, believe me, it's not a contest I want to win.
Yeah.
But it does do something to you.
Yeah.
Like you do, like there is this thing in you about exploration. It's new school, new this, new that, it instills something in you that's a little different than I think than the kid sometimes that grows up in the same place. And that's not to, I think it's wonderful to have roots and to do all this stuff. But that's a really interesting part of your story I did not know.
Well, this, is so that led me, though, to drop out of college and go pursue a singing career, not the career really, but the education. So that was, kind of the multiple generations on my mother's side who were musicians. So she was, I think, 5th generation professional musician.
Oh, wow.
And for some reason, not fitting well in kind of the academic environment, I was like, okay, well, let me just go do what I sort of do naturally anyway, although lack a lot of discipline, always did. And so I went out to California, where my brother had already, moved, and he was, and my mother as well. But my brother was, doing all kinds of really crazy, cool musical things there. And so I did, and then realized, okay, that was probably a mistake too. But there you go, another life experience. And ultimately, I ended up marrying a Turkish guy and moving to Istanbul, Turkey. Yeah.
This is awesome.
which is where I had my son, who is an extraordinary person, and oh my gosh, I can't believe how old he is. Should I even tell?
Well, that's completely up to you. But people tell us things.
He's a grown-ass man, let's just put it that way. And it startles me every single day to think about how grateful I am actually to have had him early, because I've gotten to enjoy him as a person so much more.
That's awesome.
We just have such a great time, and he's well settled, and he's a startup guy too, although on the finance side, if you can believe it. So I pass the math gene. I don't actually have it myself, but I did manage to pass it through to the next generation, which was really a great achievement.
Well, good job.
I know. I'm so excited about that, because at least I have somebody to call. Can you help me with this?
That's awesome. That's awesome. That's
but
great.
he ended up, he's like a crazy cool guy. He finished his undergrad in 3 years, and he was really very, and it was a finance undergrad, and he was like really committed to the idea of going to University of Chicago. He wanted to go there so bad he couldn't see straight. So he picks up the phone. He started working right out of school for the Bank of New York, on their kind of money market side as an analyst, sort of consolidating things. He was always really good at that stuff. So he started calling headhunters in Chicago and saying, I want to come to Chicago. I've applied to the University of Chicago, and I want to come to Chicago and work. And so within a year, he was in Chicago working for the third largest hedge fund of funds in the world.
Wow. As
an analyst. And they paid for his University of Chicago MBA.
Wow.
So, like, and he did all that without even asking, can you help me figure this out or whatever. He just like, hey, here's what I'm doing. Okay.
So there's a lot of generational awesomeness here. I mean, you know what I mean? It's like you guys are like these superhuman like entrepreneur people. But it is interesting to see how mom and dad were these types, and then their kids.
Yeah.
And then the kids.
Yeah.
That's really fascinating. It's awesome.
Well, when you dig in, have you ever done like family history stuff?
Oh yeah.
So,
yeah, but that's for a whole different episode. Oh my God.
Probably, but
don't get Matt started on genealogy, man.
Oh, we're going to have this conversation sometime because I
just did some family trauma history stuff. I'm not talking about it now.
That's the bad stuff when that comes
you just triggered
up, right?
me. Okay, you just triggered me.
Okay, sorry, it was a microaggression. I didn't mean.
I'm just messing with you.
But the interesting thing about this is, when you start to look back at your family, you start to see these weird characteristics. Like,
right.
On one side of our family, on my mother's side, there are just all these sort of pioneering types, and a lot of them women who, started a boarding house in, Baltimore in the early 1700s as a widow, who had nothing, and then migrated to Kentucky and started another one, and that kind of stuff, and a great aunt. So I guess it was my great might be three greats grandfather was one of the founders of the Fort Worth Stockyard.
Wow.
And his daughter. Then after he died and the sons decided they wanted to do oil instead of cattle, she was like, no, we're cattle people. She started like one of the biggest dairies. Her name was Lilian also, by the way. Started one of the biggest dairy in the central or the, that region of Texas. And so you start to think about, these people who just picked up and left and went places and did things, and a whole bunch of them were women, including my grandmother. Both my grandmothers were pioneering women. So I kind of, they're my role models. My grandmothers are both my role models, and did extraordinary things. I mean, when you find a picture of your grandmother who with Dr. and Mrs. Martin Luther King at Ebenezer Baptist Church in 1957, when she shouldn't have been there.
Come on.
You kind of go,
that's got to make you proud.
She was
wow.
She was just something well beyond her. She pioneered everything, and she did it with this, kind of tough love. She was like 5'9", and you look at pictures of her from 1916 or 17 when she's playing basketball. Like, it's really hysterical. But she ended up, a resilient woman who lost her husband when her kids when my mother wasn't even born. She was 6 weeks away from being born, and her husband died of strep throat. He was a commander in a CCC camp, and there was a strep throat epidemic, and he died. And she had two little boys and a baby on the way. And to hear her tell stories of, I didn't cry because I didn't want it to affect my baby, and so I said I was not going to cry until this baby was born, and then I could let it go. But then managed to, make her way, move back home with her parents in Fort Worth, and then married a man a few years later who was from Atlanta and moved to Atlanta, where she became the president of the Atlanta Women's Club, and, then the first woman minister of music in the Georgia Baptist Convention in her, 50s.
Wow.
Which was crazy. So we spent fun holidays, her 10 grandkids, driving around Georgia with her, going to churches where she set up children's choirs. So
That's
that was
cool.
that was her job. And so we were singing from little babies, doing all kinds of crazy stuff and being out in the world and learning what it was to connect to people in all kinds of ways, in all kinds of places.
You said your mother was involved in the opera as well?
Yeah, she sang opera. I mean, she started in church music. It was actually how she and my father met, where she was a paid soloist in his church, and because that's what she did. But she was, kind of a big fish in a small pond for a long time in Columbia as well.
Something about Columbia.
Yeah, we'll have to connect on that because we may know some same folks.
It's possible. I mean, I
If you
was,
moved 72 times after that, maybe
yeah,
not.
I
But,
know. I lived in. I don't know how long I lived in Columbia, but I was born there, and I lived in Greenville a little bit. But yeah, it's I didn't know that about your mom and about. I have an aunt who left South Florida when she was like 17 to go pursue a career on Broadway. And my great aunt was a performer. And she would do all the nightclub scenes and with the jazz clubs and stuff like that. And she was really kind of famous in her day and married a pro football player and whatever. But my aunt, who's still alive today, Paige O'Hara, she'll end up being a guest on the show here too. But like she's the voice of Belle for Disney's Beauty and the Beast.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so she ended up, that was like her crowning kind of achievement. But she kind of went for it at this young age. She was like, this is my dream. And so she went and starved on Broadway and like worked her ass off and like, did her thing. And
That's so cool.
yeah. I come from a pretty decent lineage of entrepreneurial type people, but not like what you're talking. I mean, this is so freaking fascinating.
Well, it's people's lives are interesting, and I think that when you start looking at what the influences are in your life, how you, and it's one of the reasons that I believe in mentorship and that kind of stuff, and try to do as much of that as possible. Because if you don't have those experiences and you don't have those role models in your life early, and yet you have this burning desire to be a starter, to do something that you're committed to. And I've never met an entrepreneur ever who didn't have something that drove them so strongly around what they believe in. We solve problems for ourselves typically when we decide we're going to, I've got this great idea. Usually it's us. Like, I'm just about to go over to Groundswell to talk about, you're not going to believe this, like a design for, a 3D design for a piling kind of boat hook. So it's easier to get lines over a piling when you're tying your boat up
I love it.
In a marina. I mean, that's kind of stupid, but I just watch people struggle with it all the time. We struggle with it all the time. And it's like, okay, I've got a design. I started drawing this thing, that was going to like solve for that and for regular boat hook stuff, because they're stupid in the way that they open and close, and, you're forever miserable and trying to do it. So I'm going to go over there and start working on my
Cool. Hey,
new
just
boat
we
hook.
do like investing in physical products that can be exported. I'm just saying.
Okay, there you go. This might be if I could find like a Kickstarter for boat enthusiasts, I would be in a good spot with that probably. But it's it's really funny how these little you're trying to solve problems for yourself always.
Yep.
And then the real trick is is it a problem that other people have, or is it just my perception, or that? And so spending time with entrepreneurs, mentoring them and coaching on, understanding really what's happening with your prospective customers. Is that really your prospective customer? Who's willing to pay for it? How much are they willing to pay? How big is the scope of the problem? Are you solving something that you really don't need to, or are there other solutions for it? Which is also tricky, because I cannot tell you how many times I've sat and done a Google search while somebody's talking to me and said, "Oh, that's already in the market, right? Let me just show you the 42
Not the Google search,
competitors
Lilian,
you've got."
anything but that. Yeah.
And I'm going to say something terrible. I used to love to do that with academics, researchers.
100%. I get it. I get it.
Yeah, that one. It's tricky because you're living inside sort of a bubble when you're working on academic research, and so you're thinking about your academic view of it and others' academic views on it. And then when you start to look at commercialization, it's a whole different matter.
Yep.
So that was always fun. I love doing that.
Lilian, let me ask you this: your upbringing, and not really, it was very explorative. You were born into this group of people that were talented and on the move, and you were constantly being thrown into new domains. Is there anything? Can you itemize like the things you learned from that, as far as what has directly translated to your business acumen, or is it just something? It's just an instinct that was, developed in you.
That's such a good question. I think that, if I had to tick off the things that I'm sure were a result of environment, it would be resilience. It would be a little bit competition. And I'm going to say this in a peculiar way. So my older brother was a child prodigy, and he was started college at 14 in 74 or something like that. I mean, it wasn't common in those days. He was a musical prodigy, but he was also, mathematically gifted and all that stuff. So, and my mother was this absolutely stunningly beautiful, 5'10.5", auburn-haired, gifted, incredibly gifted person, and incredibly creative. And I spent a lot of my childhood actually feeling like I was having to compete for attention, forget my poor younger brother, who was probably the smartest of all of us, frankly, but turned out to be, kind of left behind in the draft of all this stuff. And so, so I think that while I'm not naturally competitive, what I began to realize is you have to figure out ways to set yourself apart.
Yeah.
And when I was a kid, some of those ways were not very good. They were not very positive. Let's just say there was a lot of experimentation in my early life. But I think it created independence. So resilience, and a level of confidence that you sort of have to, that fake it till you make it bit is really, if you're not sure that you can compete with all those things, you have to figure out how to at least have presence enough to
100%.
Make people believe you can.
Yeah.
So, and self-confidence is something that probably most everybody struggles with. I think the only person I ever heard go, "Fake it till you make it." What's that really about? Is my significant other. Like, you never struggled with that, did you? No, I don't even know what you're talking about. Okay, yeah, that's you. Congratulations.
I completely understand that, because it's really too. I mean, especially with us starting Legacy Angel Network. I mean, I didn't. You know my background. We've talked about it.
Yeah.
I just saw a need in the community. I don't know that I was. No, I know I was not the most qualified to fill it. I just thought that I could. Mm-hmm. And and there's times I was sitting in there's times today I'm sitting in conversations and I'm nodding my head and I really don't know what's happening.
What is he saying?
Yeah. But
what is that word?
But I'm in the chair, so But then that's why I'm constantly surrounding myself with people like you, who know more than me, who have been around longer than me, who have been it, done it, did it, whatever, and doing it, and for me, that, and being transparent at this stage of my life about faking it, I think is so helpful to people that are younger than me, who are venturing out and saying, "Hey, there is a point where you're in a room, you feel like you just don't belong in."
Yep.
And just soak that up.
Yeah.
Just soak it in a little bit.
Yeah.
Just to soak in that experience, because being in that room, you're going to gain some knowledge, gain some experience that make you more qualified for the next room.
Sure. It's so very interesting. I think that we have reached this moment when it's okay to say these things out loud.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. Because there was, again, I'm not young, so my life was, my earliest. And I'll just go back to this thing for a second about how I ended up in technology, of all things. So how do you go from being, well, by the time I married my husband, I was mostly singing jazz. And so
Love some jazz.
Yeah,
Do you have any recordings, by the way?
Don't lie, Lilian.
Probably
Where
not.
can we find those?
Lilian.
right, no.
Any home video? Anything
No, we didn't do home videos. That was
Okay.
not a thing. No,
Okay. All right.
but that was also, fake it till you make it, because you have to be super competitive and all kinds of things. And I think for me, ultimately, that was just, I'm not competitive in that way.
Right.
I compete with myself, but not with others. It just isn't fun for me.
Yeah.
So,
Interesting idea, though, the way you phrased that just your own, like competing with your own
Yeah.
self-development kind of
well,
thing.
and that kind of goes back to this idea of faking it till you make it, right? So here I was coming back from Istanbul, Turkey, with a 3-month-old baby. I was leaving my husband, not going back. He didn't know it yet. So I had a round trip ticket, 1 suitcase, a baby, and no freaking idea what I was going to do. And I was reading Time and Newsweek every week there, and all I was seeing was stuff about computers, and I'm thinking, I'll never survive. I don't know what I'll do. I just don't know what I'll do. So I get home on his birthday in 1985, and I'd been away for 3 years, I guess. I visited back and forth, but so I get to telling my parents I'm not going back, which was like pretty brave, because early on they were, you're doing what? When I was going to move there. And it was a fabulous experience. Let me just say that the marriage was the only thing wrong with the experience. It was a fabulous experience.
Gotcha.
So here I am now sitting in there in the dining room crying about how am I going to survive? I'll have to go get a job, and I don't know what I can do, and I quit college, so I'm an idiot, and all of those things. And my dad said, "Come with me," and he took me back into his office, and he had a Mac, the very original 1984 Mac. This is March of 1985.
Come on.
So he says, "See this? You're going to learn how to use this, and you'll be fine." And I'm thinking, okay, okay. But it turned out, because it was graphical and all that stuff, that I got it. It was not me having to figure stuff out. So pretty soon, I'm doing little gigs for DoD contractors, doing illustrations for training manuals, like weapon slings and missiles and all kinds of stupid things like that. But I was digging it. I was having a great time. And United Telecom and, some of those folks, doing schemas for business phone systems and stuff. And then I started realizing that you could use this computer to connect to other Macs through something called Apple Talk at the time, like little phone cables,
I've
right?
never heard
Little
that term,
RJ45 phone cables. So you could connect them together and then to a printer, and then you could write macros in Word and Excel and pull things out of databases and be able to automate all these things. So I started writing macros and doing things like that. And then I was consulting to little small businesses around the area and, doing pretty well at that. But I kept going into the computer stores. In those days, there were like these business computer stores, resellers, that, would sell the software and the hardware. And so I'd take my clients in and say, okay, you need this many Macs and you need this much Microsoft Office. And in those days, that was what Microsoft really made its profits on. So DOS was the big thing that everybody knew, but Microsoft Office on the Mac was where they were making their profit. So I was, like, okay, you buy this and this and this many Microsoft Offices, and then we'll, set up all your systems, so your mailing list, and your this and your that, and blah, blah, blah. And pretty soon, I get a call from somebody at Microsoft who says, one of our resellers down there says you bring people in all the time to sell them Microsoft Office, and would you be interested in working for us? I'm like, well, I don't know. I went home and I said to my dad, okay, so do you think, and by the way, here I am with this little baby living at my parents' house because we can't afford to live anywhere else just yet. And, no, there's nothing like, child support coming from Istanbul.
Right.
I'm promising you that.
Right.
And never was. But
yep.
but I said, well, so I got this call, and what do you think? And he's, are you kidding me? Hello,
Yeah,
it's Microsoft. And at that time, Microsoft was, a relatively small company. People really, there was VisiCalc, and there, for PCs, and there was Word for PC, which is some ridiculous thing that was trying to compete with WordPerfect. But there was Microsoft Office on the Mac, and it was pretty cool. So
any idea the size and scope of Microsoft at the time?
Yeah, there were 5,000 people working at Microsoft when I took that job. I mean, we had weekly calls, like on the phone, that would, like where you have 50 people on the phone who were in this particular group. So it was a really cool time to start working for Microsoft, and I didn't realize it, but in that period that I was there, so this was pre-Windows, right? We grew tremendously. There were, when I left just about 5 years later, there were 25,000 people. But I still remember, a sales meeting where Steve Ballmer is standing up on the stage, and there's all of us, every one of us, like all of Microsoft basically in this room in Hawaii. And he's saying, you need to, well, maybe that was in Hawaii, it might have been somewhere else, but he was saying, we have to, this year, we have to make $500 million, $500 million. And it was like, yes, we're going to make $500 million. It was like, do you know what Microsoft's worth now? I mean, like, what does Microsoft do revenue-wise now?
Right.
Being there in those early days was so fantastic.
That's
because
cool.
You got to see and do, kind of everything. You got to participate in lots of different kinds of things. And of course, you saw Bill routinely, and you saw Steve all the time, and you that kind of stuff. And then it was very formative for me, because it definitely took I never had a notion about being a woman as being different because of the women I come from, right? So, strong, assertive, individualistic women who just never saw being a woman as a barrier. So I didn't really have that in my head ever as one of my barriers. Mine was I didn't go to college, or I didn't finish college, or that kind of stuff. But what I got from the Microsoft experience was there were as many women as men, even in some of the technical ranks and that sort of thing.
That's awesome.
It didn't feel different. And oh, by the way, over time, I began to realize that people naturally assumed you must be really smart if you worked for Microsoft. I was like, oh, I'm not that smart, so I don't know what's going on here. But okay, if that's what they think, I'll let them think it. It's all right. So that really was part of the fake it till you make it bit, right? Where you're trying to be as smart as all these other folks. But I got to exercise a lot of kind of entrepreneurial on the edge stuff, and even challenging what sort of the strategies were in certain areas, and saying we shouldn't be doing that. We should be doing something different, and let's try this instead. And getting the buy-in, if and in those days, oh my gosh, you didn't make much in the way of money, but you sure got loaded up with stock options, and wow, it was
that's awesome.
It was a gift to me, this, kind of serendipitous thing that started a whole lifetime of a different path for me.
Well,
it was beautiful. Yeah.
What was so you're at Microsoft, right? You're what an amazing experience at that time. I mean, I'm blown away. What was your first? And I don't know if Connor, if you're going to go here, but like right now, but what was your first step out into so you're working for this juggernaut of a company, and what was your first step into your idea, because I know that you co-founded some companies, you founded some companies, you did some things.
Yeah.
What was your first step into that world, and to where it was your thing?
Well, what's interesting was that there was a little bit of stepping in that I actually got to do with Microsoft, and
Okay.
and it was fascinating. I was actually thinking about it this week on Women's Day, right? That there are so many statistics around how there have been setbacks for women in the workplace, and setbacks. A lot of them, and one of these things that triggered for me, it was a McKinsey study, and it triggered an interesting thought for me, which was something like 37% of women in this study last year said that they that their ideas were taken by someone else, or they were never acknowledged for their ideas, that some colleague or coworker had taken credit for an idea that a woman had. And I know this to be true. It does happen, and I think it happens all the time, and it's not just about women, but I realize that probably one of the things that I learned over time was, and there's a quote, and I don't know who said it, although Ronald Reagan used it at one point. It was, there's no end to what you can accomplish if you don't care who gets credit.
Yeah.
And I had to learn that, because you want to be acknowledged, especially early in your career. You want to be seen as someone who has the ideas and does the things and all that sort of stuff. I frankly don't have that many unique ideas. I'm a collaborator at best, and I don't know if you've ever done some, those personality kind of tests and things like that. But I recently did a predictive they call it predictive indicator, PI test, and I'm a maverick, I guess, does not surprise me at all. Is somebody who just like the details, somebody else will take care of that, and off you go. But spread the love and
I don't
collaborate.
need to take the test. That's me.
And collaborate, So that's kind of my stock in trade. Really, maybe my superpower is collaboration. So I realized that it was years after, but it made me remember an incident years after, when I was off doing the first startup, which was not my idea, by the way. I was invited to the party, and because I was with Microsoft at the time, but it was the most incredible thing that I ever did. And today I have some of the closest friends ever who were a part of that kind of very grueling process of starting something up in 1994, when venture capital wasn't so easy to get, and startups in healthcare were not really a thing. So it was an amazing opportunity in life to kind of find identity and that sort of thing. But it reminded me of, in the process of doing that, the person who took my job, what I had done was sort of buck the system. Originally, I was in what was called the reseller channel, and then was kind of brought into a small little skunkworks group in Microsoft to go out and figure out how to get Microsoft's new offerings that were at that point all about the back office, all about the server. So it was a partnership with IBM to do what was going to be OS 4 for anyone who can remember any of this stuff. And then with Sybase on SQL Server. But then we ended up breaking up with both of those folks and doing our own thing. So SQL and NT were the result of that. But that was our foundational stuff for owning the back office and killing AS400s, which were the dominant kind of thing in those days. But the strategy that was developed for us little 20 people who were supposed to go out into the world and start making friends with every big system integrator, every, Anderson Consulting and all those people of the day, was that they would all resell the back office stuff because they all had the big corporate clients. But, kind of, my natural curiosity was a lot about asking all of these partners questions about how they sell and what they sell and all that kind of stuff. And what I began to understand was they were basically just whatever the client wanted, that's what they'd sell them. Mm-hmm. They weren't there evangelizing for what we were doing or any of that sort of stuff. They were just selling whatever they needed to get done the project that they were getting big billable hours on. That was what they were worried about. Not, margin on reselling our stuff or anybody else's for that matter. So they weren't going to be out there, proselytizing about client-server technology and why you need not to have that AS400 and, more agile development tools and all that kind of stuff. So I went and started looking at vertical software developers. Like, okay, so healthcare, that was my domain, banking and insurance. In those days, they were separate. Those were my vertical industries. And as I'm looking at them closely, I'm thinking, who matters here are the guys who are selling the software that all these folks buy in this industry. So why aren't we getting those software vendors to start developing client-server stuff on our back office and using our, development tools and all that stuff? And what happened was the person who was leading the group said, just prove it. Prove it. Okay, I'll prove it. So I started going and talking to some of these vertical software vendors, and they were actually thinking about it. But what I realized then was if we could invest in them in some ways, give them free software, give them, free development tools, give them specialized support, give them Bill doing a launch event with them, we could get them to do stuff. And it suits their purposes as well, because they need to get off of reliance to other technologies as well. So that's what happened. That's how it went. And that's actually how I met the team that was doing this very, very early electronic health record. I couldn't help them. They weren't really a company yet. So I couldn't officially help them. I couldn't invest in them in any way. I couldn't do any of that stuff. But I was helping them off the side of my desk and really learning a ton about the industry that they were in and that sort of stuff. And at one point, they basically just said, why don't, it was, just a handful of people, why don't you come help us? And they had just won the Windows World Open, where Bill gave them a big trophy for doing a dial-up connection from the floor of Comdex, which was the biggest tech kind of event in the world at the time, back to a server in Orlando over a dial-up line. They were getting somebody's electronic health record over a dial-up from the stage of Comdex. And it was like on SQL Server, and NT at the back end. So they were already doing, poster child stuff that I was helping them do in the background. But it was, so fast forward to a couple of years into that, the guy who took my job came in. There was a new sort of vice president level or senior vice president level person who'd been hired at Microsoft to really expand all the vertical industry stuff. And he was a super cool Brit, and Tom, my former colleague, brought him to meet us in Orlando. And he turned around and he said, I want you to know that this is the person, he said to that guy, this is the person who started, who made your job possible. She's the one who put us on to this idea of vertical industry and how we do this today. So you need to listen to her. And I was stunned.
That's so cool.
Tom, wow, what a nice thing to say. And to have that, to have somebody remember your credit was the thing that was stimulated this week by that idea that women are feeling like they're not getting credit.
That's
Sometimes
awesome.
you don't have to. Sometimes if you just make something happen. So that was from 20 people in that group to 3,000 he had at the point that I met him.
Wow.
And like 5 or 6 vertical industries. And I know they've changed their strategy many times since then, but it was pretty cool.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
That's rad.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah, it was a nice memory to have this week.
Man.
It really was.
Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, but so that first adventure was totally about, let me explain why that mattered to me at that point too. My mother died. She had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and she was not, she was living between 2 different cities, so she didn't have a primary care physician, and so she would have these episodes where she was just passing out, essentially, and she'd end up in the ED, and it's been 30 years ago last month, so it's been a long, long time, but she was, having blood transfusions pretty routinely and that sort of stuff. And ultimately, one of these ED docs got really smart and said, how often is this happening to you? And she said, oh, well, I think this is 3, 4, 5 times maybe. and because he'd seen her more than once. So then he refers her for a bunch of testing, and and it turns out it's non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. So it was very late, and while she did manage to get in some clinical trials at Stanford and things like that, it was just too late. So she didn't live very long. But what I realized at that moment was what these guys in Orlando were doing was that they were making it possible for two doctors to know what was happening with one person.
Oh, wow.
And exchange an electronic health record across sites and facilities and providers. And that what I was doing with Microsoft was, interesting and fun and important, I thought. But that was life-altering. That was life-saving.
Yeah.
That was what might have made it possible for my mother to have been diagnosed much earlier, because you can live with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma for a while. And, even though that was long ago, it was, it was one of those things that made this a very, very personal quest and important to have happen.
That's incredible. Just I didn't even realize until right now you're telling that story, the implications of your work. I went to design school, and that my experience through that was always like a big gaming and simulation and design school. You know what I mean? So everything is electronic, and my professors would always tell me, you guys don't know how easy you have it. Like, you don't have to hand draw these schematics or whatever. You know what I mean? And so it's the same kind of thing, like not even realizing the impact of that. Did you make those connections? Is that when you made that connection when the weight really sat with you, the value of the work you were doing?
Well, that was 1993 when she died, and the work that this group was doing in Orlando was getting going then. So I didn't quite put it together until I realized that their ability to do this across, 10 physician sites, 100 providers, and
it's amazing.
All that kind of stuff could literally change the world. And today, this is how electronic health records are supposed to work. I'm going to tell you that my experience in the intervening years is not always,
right.
But it was a super important, step forward, and it was among the earliest in that domain. And there was so much sort of, bravery among the technical founders and the first couple of people, two women in particular, who are today very, very dear friends. Wordle and others who came along. So there were 7 of us women who ultimately had this lifelong kind of relationship. 2 of them are Wordle partners every morning. You still do that stupid stuff. But the impact of what they all believed about what this could do and what it could mean. And these were people who were healthcare insiders. I was not.
Oh wow.
So I was learning a lot from them about what this meant in terms of how it changed operationally what happens in healthcare settings. But what I was translating that to was what this does for human beings that are the recipients of care in those environments, that get the benefit of their provider knowing so much more, understanding so much more, having access, being able to see trend lines, and stuff we take for granted today, trend lines in your lab results, for example, stuff that nobody was thinking about at that time.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I love your like how in touch you are with the reality of like how the digital world affects and impacts, for better or worse, what's happening offline. I feel like that's I don't know. There's a lot of people that just want to pretend like the digital space doesn't exist, or they have no idea the implications of it. And those 2 words for you are very closely tied together, and you're using it for the better kind of thing. It's very cool.
Well, I think that those, there's some level of altruism in all of us about what we do. So StarterStudio I was on the board of for a long, long time because I just believe in. When we started that company in Orlando, and just to give you an idea, there just wasn't a startup scene at all, let alone in healthcare. And so it was a struggle always. Now, we raised venture capital. We did all kinds of, but it was out of, the Northeast and Silicon Valley. And there was always that pressure. You'll never be able to hire here. You can't do that. You need to move. But we didn't. We never did. The idea that that there needs to be, kind of resources for starters was something that I believed in strongly. So those who founded StarterStudio, Greg Pollock, who's just a really interesting guy and very, very smart, and he founded kind of the educational part of it. There were some other exited founders who started the kind of co-working area that it was housed in. And so I got involved when another friend of mine, woman friend, took on the CEO role, and began to understand that there were things I could do to help others in the local market, even though I was off in the world doing all kinds of other things. So I joined the board and made contributions, and I was the first check into the fund, which is,
wow, that's cool.
An Evergreen Fund. So I was the first private check into there.
That's a big deal. I mean, I don't know. I hope that our listeners pick up on that. Like, to be the first check.
Well, and in that case, no return to me, right?
No.
So an Evergreen Fund is a nonprofit fund that's simply for the purpose of turning money back into the fund from exits or liquidity events that happen for starters that get funded by it. Well, so it's just there as a pool, to signal to investors, other investors who are looking for their return, that this has been vetted, it's real, it's, they've had an education in what this is about, they know how to go through due diligence, all that kind of stuff. It's a signal first. And secondly, it's a way to, put a pool in place that can grow. And so that can grow and fund more starters. So you can get more people out there in the world with at least a small footing to get started. Not that it's a big fund, it's not, but it's an important part of the ecosystem in Central Florida. So, and it has invested in between the Volusia Fund that was the county invested in through Embry-Riddle, and the Orlando Fund that the city of Orlando continues to invest in every year. More than it should be right around $2 million now has gone into starters.
That's awesome.
So it's incredible, and the returns now, like we're just hitting the 7 and 8 year timing for these companies. So it should start rolling. We've got a couple that we expect will have liquidity events here pretty soon, and some great, tremendous companies that have come through it that are doing incredible things. You talk about kind of the altruistic idea of what we do and how we do it. There are some companies in the current build stage program that are doing things for churches. So how to organize all of the volunteer efforts for churches. So while it's a social enterprise, it's not a nonprofit. It's a social enterprise that's there for the purpose of getting more activity into the body of a church, and then connecting that with corporate environments where all of the things they're trying to do in their corporate social responsibility and that stuff and giving back can flow out to nonprofit organizations and needs in the community. So that's a really cool thing, and that's a guy who's an exited entrepreneur who just has a passion for this, and kind of motivating people to get involved and give back. And then another a couple that also been done successful fintechs, who's doing another an app called Tuesday. You can even sign up for it. It's called Tuesday, and it is making everyday Giving Tuesday. So, like for nonprofits that 90% 7% of their mailing list is dead and never gives and all that kind of stuff. Being able to extend their touch out to all of the people, those who support and those that don't, and then helping those people figure out if there are other nonprofits that they are interested in. So they've had some incredible results with, people giving, 20 to 50% more than they ever gave because they found some other nonprofits on the platform that they were really closely aligned with and wanted to support. And so you think about stuff like that and you go, all right, that's why you engage with entrepreneurs, because there's a passion for what they're doing and how they're helping and what's going on in the world and how you can change it. People who are doing things around athletics, people who are doing things around, one of the great starters that we had come through our seed program, and it was a recipient of seed funding a couple of years ago. I got to, when I gave the report to the city of Orlando about what their support of StarterStudio means to the community, I brought this founder along, super smart guy who's done a couple of other companies in the past, but it is, it's called Home Lending Pal, and it is. Oh, yeah. So you know about Home Lending Pal?
Yeah.
So do you need to interview him too? Maybe
I would love to.
Yeah, so we'll make sure that you get Brian in here because he's just an awesome guy. And he's been able to develop this amazing platform. He and his co-founder and a terrific core team have developed a platform that allows first-time home buyers, particularly people of color, to understand all the things they need. So there's some financial literacy in it and the connection to lots of lenders who will help them get into that first-time home buying
it's really cool.
position. So it's been amazing. And the CEO of IBM has been incredibly supportive, has been on stage with them. IBM has engaged with them on a whole bunch of AI work around this and, as a part of their kind of give back into the world. And so I'm just endlessly proud of the ability to participate with those kinds of entrepreneurs who have something truly that they want to do for human beings, that it's not just about the tech, it's not just the geek stuff, it's really about what that does to affect change for people, for actual human beings.
I love that.
It makes me so happy. And StarterStudio has so I just stepped in as the interim CEO. So it was like, oh, Lilian, you're resting, investing, or whatever you're doing. Why don't you be the CEO for a while? And I was like, well, maybe interim. I could probably do it for a little while. And the expectation was 6 months as we, moved, downsized from the big facility we were in and kind of offloaded the origins of that organization were really around co-working. Very, very early. So the guys who founded it were, saying there's no place for people to come and hang out and work together and all that kind of stuff. And the idea of co-working was very new in 2012 or 13 or something like that. So they took this huge space, almost 10,000 square feet. And then when Greg Pollock, kind of joined in on that, it was about, well, we need to educate these people. We need to give them some programs and some way of understanding what they're doing and that kind of thing. So it was always trying to balance this kind of co-working business as a nonprofit and this, programming stuff, which was the most important part. And that just got to be harder and harder. And by the way, there were all these co-working spaces popping up everywhere suddenly. So there were lots of people in the commercial domain had taken up the slack on what was needed. So it was now, okay, that not really necessary. So let's focus on programming. So we were coming to the end of our lease and we were going to be able to leave the facility and, or we thought we had somebody who was going to take over the space. And we were coming to the end of the lease. And so I just stepped in November 2019 to kind of bridge till we could get out of the space, to do a little revamp on the programming and that sort of stuff, and then get us moved into another space and hire a new CEO, right? That was my job. That was all I was supposed to do. Well, that was November 2019. April of 2020 was supposed to be when this other company was going to take us over. March, the building shut down.
Oh, no.
And that was suddenly, the other were no longer interested in expanding as the months went by.
Right.
So we were really, and of course, we had nobody in the place. It was closed. So we switched to virtual programming and ramped up the programs, did more, expanded the programs, put more people through. We doubled the number of programs that year, doubled again the next year. But we still had the lease, so we could, until the lease was done, it would be impractical to ask some person to come try to take on the constant juggling and try to figure out how to manage the overhead of that and do the other. So that all got, taken care of end of 2021 and beginning of that's when we started looking for a new CEO and found an amazing person who is running it today, Dawn Haynes, she's just rocking it and has done so much in just the 10 months she's been there.
Wow.
It's or almost a year. I guess April will be a year.
Wow.
That she's been there. So what I thought was 6 months turned into 2.5 years, and then yay, Rockstar came along. Excellent, fantastic. So now back on the board and just participating as a mentor and delivering some of the programming to continue to be sort of a teacher. So that's
so cool.
Yeah, it's been great.
What do you find like when a startup, when you're interviewing a startup, they're someone's maybe saying, hey, would you mentor so and so or this company or this and that? I'm sure you have some criteria as to whether or not you would even mentor a company, but what do you find are some of the initial, mistakes maybe that young entrepreneurs or people young to being an entrepreneur make that you kind of identify typically early, that you kind of maybe have to help them overcome or what are some of those initial things? I'm just thinking of man, everything you've been saying is so rich, and we're gonna have people that that continue to watch what we do and stuff that want to step into this space, step into this world. What are some of the early mistakes that you've seen that they have to kind of overcome?
Yeah, that's a great question because I from my own experience and in multiple startups, and watching lots of starters and helping lots of starters. I think the first and biggest mistake is the one that we kind of referenced a little while ago, which is not understanding where this thing fits in the world. So not having done enough research to really get whether there's a there.
Yeah.
I have an idea. Is it an idea that has any ability to get somewhere? The second one is understanding that your idea will never be the same when you get through understanding it as it was when you started. So, those who just clutch on to this was the idea, the original idea, this is what it has to be, are going to lose every time because they're busy defending. They're in love with their idea, not in love with the problem that their idea originally was intended to solve. So that's number one. Fall in love with the problem. And this is Dawn Haynes says this all the time. I love to hear her say it in her beautiful British accent. Fall in love with the problem. Make sure that you really are solving something that needs solving, that there's a large enough market that needs solving it, and that you're not going to be skunked by some other big major player who's just about to do that. Another interesting thing that I learned from another great entrepreneur was that sometimes you're not solving the problem for a market, but your better opportunity might be to solve the problem for a company that's already got something there. So that first recognition, and I kind of teach this, wrote this into the programming for StarterStudio, is understanding whether you are a product or an or a company. Because we all start with this like product idea, this little thing we're going to make, and then we make a lot of mistakes around, naming our company that thing when really that thing might not be the thing in the end because we don't know what we're really solving yet, that sort of thing. So not rushing ahead of yourself without really understanding where you belong. And then thinking about where you want to go. This is another thing that I think entrepreneurs miss all the time, is starting with the end in mind, especially with co-founders. Like this, first of all, I'm biased in believing that you need co-founders. But again, collaboration is core to who I am. So that means for me, I can't start without co-founders.
Yeah.
I don't have the skill sets, the daily motivation, I'm anything but ritual. I used to say when I had a house that had 3 bathrooms, it's like, I never brushed my teeth in the same bathroom. I had toothbrushes and toothpaste everywhere because I would go, oh crap, I forgot to brush my teeth. I guess I need to. So what's the closest bathroom? So it's like, I don't have rituals like that. So I need the balance, and I know that most other people need balance as well. It's not just me. I'm a little odd, but I'm not the only person who needs balance. So if you understand who you are, what you need, this is another important, kind of entrepreneurial lesson. What kind of people do you need around you? What skills do you need? Not the same as yours. It can't be the person who's just like you, because then you're both screwed.
Yep.
So you need varying skills that fill in the gaps. And then thinking about how your go-to-market might best work, and really studying that. And I mean saying, and this back to what I learned from this other entrepreneur, was sometimes your best opportunity is finding a gap, not in the market, but in some other vendor's offering that you can solve. AGT is a great example of that.
Okay.
Right? It's not a thing by itself. It's a gap in everybody else's thing.
That's cool.
Right?
Yeah.
So build something that gets embedded elsewhere, and you got a huge market. And my gosh, the brilliance of how they kind of released it. And I don't know about you guys, but I got on the early Bing. So I've got, early Bing access to the thing. And it's quite interesting. But of course,
cool.
they fixed it after the New York Times article. So you can't. When I asked about the nature of God, which was an interesting conversation to have, it got to, will I go to heaven, as my last question, and it cut me off and said, oh, let's change subjects now. So it was very funny. But it was an interesting conversation. But I think that's a profound lesson. So, knowing yourself well, knowing your market well, knowing what you need in the organization, and then being very clear that you will have to make lots of dynamic turns along the way, and then finding great coaches and mentors, people you can really go to. So I'm going to go back to the mentoring bit for a second, because what I don't think most people understand about mentors is that coaching is one thing. I got a topic here, a thing there. I need a little legal kind of insight. I need a little, what should I think about around this, and the way we, set up our accounting or our revenue structure or our sales organization or whatever. Those are spot things that are like, first base coaches.
Yep.
When you talk about a mentor, you're really getting to a confidant. And when you are a founder and or a co-founder, they're like, having a co-founder is like being married.
Right.
But it also means there are lots of things in that marriage that are really hard to talk about or even hard to address.
Yep.
So having a mentor is, I think, one of the biggest and most important things that you can do. Finding someone who's not just going to say you're always right, but who's going to give you insight into the things that you're going through because they've experienced them, give you insight into how to think about where you are at various stages along the journey, and how to think about things like, when things aren't going well with your co-founder.
Yep.
Like, how do I have a tough conversation? How do I And often your mentor's job is to hold a mirror up for you and say, okay, take a look at what you're doing right here.
Yep.
Think about how other people see what you're doing. It might be your leadership style. It might be your coachability.
Yep.
Even internally. It might be your perspective on things you don't quite understand about what's happening. I see this all the time in investment, by the way, where it's, taking notes in the room and going, I don't even know what that word means. So what are they talking about right now? Having someone you can trust who will keep that trust and who can help you think about it. Not tell you what to do, but help you think about it.
Yeah.
That I think is, way top of my list for what starters should be looking for around them.
I think that's awesome. I think, and I think that you're absolutely. I think you are absolutely correct. I have some co-founders with our new legacy companies, and I love them tremendously. They are a huge benefit to me. But on the day-to-day, I have at least, including yourself, at least I have 2 or 3 people that I ping and I ask questions, and that's exactly what they do for me. They hold up the mirror and they give me different perspective, and they make me sharper. They make me better. They make me a better leader. They help me to see everything from all sides. It's a whole. It's so very, very, very crucial.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I agree.
This is so. I'll go back to one of my grandmothers. She had so many sayings. My grandmother, she's like, I should just write a book of her sayings. But this one was a really important one to me, and it's continued to be. And it's the view is different from wherever you sit.
Yeah. You
can be at the same table having the same conversation, but what is behind the other person, what you see is entirely different from what they see.
Yeah.
So until you can sort of move yourself into their chair, or at least some proximity to it, you'll never see what they see.
Yeah.
So being able to have the kinds of relationships that give you that insight are, I think, crucial to most founders. And you do, you have to kind of take note and step back and examine yourself constantly. There are a lot of founders who never do that, and they end up being terrible, terrible leaders. But if you don't know when you start exactly what you want from this journey, especially if you're taking the journey with others, and you have never discussed what you expect to do. Am I going to sell this company? Do I want to run it for the rest of my life? Do I want it to be a legacy for my kids? Do I want my daughter to come run this after I'm gone? If you've never shared those ideas and not thought about the strategy of what you're doing as a company in the context of those things, you'll stumble over those at some point, and sometimes in a really big and horrible way.
Yeah. Yeah, well, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, your advice reminds me, Lilian, of there's a really popular husband and wife team in the evolutionary biology space, and they wrote this book called Hunter and Gatherer's Guide to the 21st Century. I don't know if you know Brett Weinstein, but his sentiment aligns with yours in that he said, one, humanity's greatest power in is collaboration.
Yeah.
Like that's what makes humans so unique.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, just your generalism and operating in all these different domains like you've had, it's empowered you in a way that if you just buckle down to a specific, special niche skill set, you might not be able to operate anywhere near as effectively in the venture capital space. The venture capital seems to really generalists do really well in it. People that can adapt and move nimbly and constantly changing circumstances and industries.
Yeah. It's interesting when you think about it. So I've been in the construction industry. I have been in the healthcare domain for a long time. I've been in e-commerce. Directly, but I have touched dozens of industries, and I think that there's a fascinating thing that I focus on a lot with starters, like understanding the whole of your industry, not just your market, but how it works. where the money flows, what it is you are doing or taking out of it. And I think, if you claim superpowers, I try not to claim too many because I really don't have that many. But one of mine would be the ability to understand how things work. And it just, I build things and design things, and I used to have a hobby of building furniture and stupid stuff like that. But
That's not stupid.
I really loved it. I miss having a workshop, I can tell
That's
you.
great.
But the idea that you can see things in all their dimensions, in 3 dimensions and even 4, what are the business contexts. But it also helps you to understand how people function. People self-select into the things that they do very often by types, personality types, and things like that. So people like me will always be generalists because we wouldn't know how to concentrate in one area for very long. Finding a way to kind of move across a lot of different industries and understand the correlations between one and another, even in kind of new industries as they emerge. Oh, well, what is that like and what is it not like?
Yeah.
The pattern recognizers, I think, are people who often end up in the venture world.
That's a good way to say it. And Rick Rubin's new book, The Creative Act, I've been reading that and enjoying it. And he has this really great analogy where he says, like, people, innovators that can see new things and opportunities.
Yeah.
They really, everyone's kind of looking through the same lens. They just change the aperture.
That's right.
They make it wider, they make it smaller. Like they're able to either macro, micro see something that other people don't.
Yeah.
As we're wrapping up, do you have any advice for people on how they might change their vision and be able to see an opportunity? What's the process there?
Wow, what a great question that is. How to see an opportunity?
How have you seen yours, by experience?
Well, so I'll tell you again, I'm not really a person who comes up with the original idea. I'm rarely that person. What I do, when I think about how I function, I see embers. Like I see people, with a little, kind of something that's just getting warmed up over here, people or situations or industries. There's a little thing going on here and a little thing going on here and a little thing going on here. And all I do is kind of collect them up together till they can ignite. And then, and actually I used to, one of the companies that I founded, the team called me the chief fire starter because that's really all I would just like, okay, I see. Like put all this together and what is this? This is a, and oh yeah, this is a, and then I just leave them there with the fire. Okay, your job now. You stoke that and move, and now it's time for me to move on.
That.
So because I can't, my attention doesn't last much longer than that. But I think in terms of seeing opportunities, it is just as you say, opening your aperture and really looking broadly and then trying to find the things that align. And that's how you end up with an offering that may look like the same thing that somebody else has already made, but if you apply it to an industry it's never been applied to, it's an innovation. So you're just looking for where the opportunities are because of what the similarities might be.
Wow.
And if you can figure that out, or you can watch how an industry has changed here and see that industry, oh my gosh,
they haven't made the same strides.
Haven't done that. But unfortunately, lots of entrepreneurs, again, we solve for our own circumstance, right? We solve for the thing that's a problem for us. And so if we get too passionate about that, we don't tend to look up and open the aperture or get on the other side of the table and see what somebody else sees. And I think all of those, whether that's way too many metaphors to put into one comment, it does boil down to one simple thing, and I think it's curiosity. I think you have to be so curious and constantly testing every single thing, testing an idea with all kinds of people, asking people. Don't keep it to yourself. Ask, and you'll hit on something because someone else has that view that you don't. And your mind can be blown by what the opportunity and potential is in a place you never would have looked.
That's awesome.
I think.
I have one parting question for you.
Uh-oh.
I think I asked this question to everybody. Yeah, but
This is the one.
this is the one. I mean, it's not the one. It's all of it, but this is. I'm a people guy. Like my passion. At the end of the day, I can dwindle everything I do down to I love people. Like that's my thing. What is your thing? What is your thing that kind of just drives you? That you're just the thing when no one's looking, the stuff you think about, like what is your internal just passion and that drives you to be who you are?
Oh my gosh! Well, it's precisely being a resource to people who. So I am a pattern recognizer. So I connect people a lot.
Yeah.
I'll go, oh, so and so is working on something like that. So you should talk to them, or there's some insight in there, or that's a potential thing. But the other is, so it's that connection stuff. But the other is helping people break through, like getting someone to an aha moment. Sometimes kind of in a tough way, really shaking them up. And there are some entrepreneurs who are uncoachable.
Yeah.
Right? They just can't hear anything except what they have already believed that they have done about everything.
Yeah.
And they can't hear a word. They just defend. But when you find someone who's passionate about what they're doing, they really want to get to it, and you're able to lend some perspective. The perspective might include, oh, here are the 3 people you should talk to about blah, blah, and blah. Or have you considered this? What about that? What are the questions? And to have someone's eyes just open up and go, oh my God, I never thought about that.
Yeah.
That's it. Or that takes me to what I know can be it, if I can just get my mind wrapped around it. That's breakthroughs for me are the most important thing.
I love it.
In dealing, but it's people, but it's about breakthroughs.
I love it.
Yeah. Thank you.
This
was fun. Thank you.
I'm so glad that you joined us today. Seriously, I feel like we just got like a massive education. I mean, honestly, it just means so much that you do this. So,
thanks
So
so much.
cheers to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It was good to see you.
Yeah.
Boop, right there.
Get me some
All right.
bubbly water.
Lilian, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Lilian, everyone.